Okay, welcome back. So this month's Torah classes at the Lighthouse Project, including for the month of Tevet, will be dedicated in memory of the tragic deaths of Azan family from Flatbush, New York. Moshe, 11, Yitzchak, 7, and Henrietta, 3, and their 40-year-old Eliza Azan, who were burnt to death when a fast-moving fire burnt their home. May their souls ascend on high with all the Torah and prayer said in their name. And in merit of the surviving family and Refuah Shalema of Sheila Bat Louisa Aliza, 16, Daniel ben Louisa Aliza, 15, Avram ben Louisa Aliza, 13, and their father Yosef ben Ahuva Masuda. May Hashem send them a full and complete recovery. Amen. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, also I just want to dedicate this class. This week was my grandmother Gittel, my paternal grandmother's yahrzeit. So I want to mention also her name and in memory of her name. Also, please, people out there, like and share. Join the conversation. Hashtag light me up. Okay. Okay, so this class is titled Finding Faith in Difficult Times. And the reason I say in difficult times, because that's mostly when we look for faith. But it's always finding faith, not just in difficult times. Okay, so have faith is what people tell us. Doctors today understand the importance of faith from a medical point of view, the mindset of a patient, and whether they have faith in a compassionate higher power who is protecting them and will see them through their recovery, or whether they do not have faith is crucial to their percentages of healing from a medical point of view. So faith now also has its medical value. Faith, we today know, literally rewires the neural pathways in the mind, creating different chemicals and unleashing greater powers of the body cells. So when we're sitting there and we're worried and this and that, what do they tell us? Bitachon, emunah, have faith. Faith empowers us and emboldens us in making financial decisions, being better at and higher selves in relationships. Faith also diminishes the primary offender of self-realization, self-actualization, which spells success in our life. All this is brought about through faith. Okay? So that is the issue that we're talking about. How many times, really all too often, how many times do you hear yourself saying or thinking, oh, I wish I had that person's faith. That person has faith. I wish I had that person's faith. Right? So, regardless of how hard I try, I can't. You know that off notes for a moment, even though it's a pretty long class. But off notes for a moment, I shared in the high holidays this story of this person who was practicing. He had a play in the part. He had a part in the play. Oh my God. Oh, the medicine isn't working on my back. It's definitely working on my head. So, how often do we have a part in a play where what do? The person has this one part, and his job is that when the canyon goes off, he or she should scream out, whoever that person is, the war has begun. That was their whole part. Now, in practice, you're not going to keep on shooting off cannons. So they had one of the stagehands running with a sign, like the old Batman movies. My kid doesn't even know that this used to exist. They used to just have like a thing on the whole screen, black and white, mind you, that said BAM. Yeah. So this guy was running out on stage with the sign, BAM. And every time he saw that, he knew his part. He would give a scream, the war has begun. Comes the final night, and his family is, the opening night, with no more with the practice. And his whole family is there, everyone's there. And what happens? All of a sudden, there's a real cannon goes off. And he gives a jump. Oh my God, what was that? So too, most often we practice faith. We practice faith. I don't say practice faith and then practice religion. We practice having faith. But then when the cannon goes off and we truly need faith, we're left screaming, oh my God, what was that? So very often we really say to ourselves, oh my God, that person goes through so much hardship and they really have faith. And me, even when I try to get faith, it's good up to a certain level, i.e., as long as it's not tested by anything. Mind you, it could be tested at the person cutting me off and me being late. It's a small issue like that. Or me waking up and it took me an extra couple of minutes to find my keys, and there's no faith at all. So the question here is, where do we get faith? How do we get faith, right? Now I want to share with you, and I say this with all respect to my fellow observant Jews and my fellow non-observant Jews, but I want to share with you that this has nothing to do with religion. Faith in God has nothing to do with religious observance. There are people who are brought up to do and follow the instructions that they learned at home. Their parents kept Shabbat, they kept Shabbat. Their parents kept kosher, they kept kosher. Their parents went to the mikveh, they go to the mikveh, whatever it may be. But very often you find these observant Jews, commandment observant Jews, that when it comes to faith, i.e., optimism, trusting it's going to be good, trusting that God is compassionate, trusting that God is unconditionally loving, a lot of observant Jews don't have it. A lot of non-observant Jews, not because they're rebellious, for whatever reason, life brought them through journeys or whatever it may be, they came from a non-religious home or whatever it may be, married a non-religious spouse, whatever it may be, you find many non-mitzvah observant Jews who have remarkable faith. They literally have a practical, daily, communicative this relationship with God. It brings out in them warmth, happiness, love, feeling protected. I mean, literally, you look at these people sometimes and you say to yourself, my God, they have a magical life of wonders. So I'm not even talking about observance of mitzvahs now. I'm talking about faith. Faith. You'll have people with long beards who don't have faith in a loving and compassionate God. And you have people that don't keep mitzvot, but somewhere in them, it's so tangibly real that they have an unconditional, loving, compassionate God. To be more precise, very often when we talk about this faith in God, so I want to take it a step further. Of course, these observant people have faith that there exists a God. Of course, these people even have faith that this God is loving and compassionate to others. Key word here. Many people who believe that God is unconditionally loving and compassionate to every other human being, for some reason struggle in believing that their personal higher power, their personal God, is loving and compassionate. So the question is, where do you get this faith? Where do you get this faith? That's the real question that we're going to talk about today, okay? Now the question here is, let's just word out the question. Because sometimes, in my process of thinking, a very dangerous sport, sometimes I think maybe it's hardwired. A lot of the things that you're taught that you're supposed to have, sometimes I wonder if it's hardwired. There are people that never worked on having faith. It's like it's hardwired into their being. There are people who have love your fellow Jew hardwired into their making, and some people don't. So often we wonder, is faith something that's hardwired? There are optimists, there are pessimists. It's interesting. Do you know that in the Torah, optimists and pessimists, when we talk about that, we refer to your liver, a white liver or a black liver. It has to do with the liver for whatever reason. So is it biological? Is faith biological? Some people are cynical. Some people are atheistic. Some people are agnostic. Some people are pessimistic. And it doesn't make one person worse than the other. This person was born under the star of optimism and faith, and this person wasn't. This person has it hardwired in their being. They're just trusting, loving, and just know and feel the hand of their higher power, and other people don't. That's a question to ask. And is it something you can learn? Today we know that most of what we thought were hardwired is actually soft-wired. We're now learning that very practically. a whole bunch of books out there, really amazing stuff. I always share with you people what I'm reading. So you heard so much about Joe Dispenza. There's a new writer on the horizon, Mike Wolin. He's Wolin, I think I said his name right. And he has a great book called The Story Doesn't Start With You. It talks about generational stuff. And he talks about how to rewire that. There's an amazing Jewish scientist in New York, and she's the leading study of survivors and offsprings of survivors. There are things that are there, but the important part is that we can rewire that. So faith is something that you can rewire your brain to, even if it doesn't come naturally and easily. And I will suggest that it doesn't come naturally easily, either because of generational genetics or because of whatever it may be. But the real question is, can we learn it? Can we acquire faith? Even if it's not something that we just simply have naturally. Even if we're busy fighting with God all our life and thinking that God is fighting with us, can we change that? Can we change completely that perspective? For those of you who have heard me speak about the program, that's what step 2 is all about. That's why it clearly says in addiction recovery, a higher power of your understanding. It's got to be your understanding, because if your teachers and then your principals and your parents or whoever it may be use God as the devil who's going to shoot you down if you don't listen to them, well, you got to rewire that. How can you have faith in a God who's out to get you? So therefore, we're talking about, can you learn faith? Based on a teaching of the Rebbe, a mime of the Rebbe in 1978, which talks about why Judah was the 4th son, and why Judah's blessing depends upon first experiencing the first 3 sons of Jacob. We're going to find out that yes, you could acquire faith and how to acquire faith. Okay? With that being said, let's talk about an introduction. This week's Torah portion is called Vayechi. It is Shabbat Chazak. It is the closing portion of the book of Genesis. And that's why it's called Chazak. You know, anytime you finish one of the 5 books of Moses, but 7th reading, when you read the last verse, everyone rises, Chazak, Chazak, Veniz Chazek. So this Torah portion is Vayit, is the book of, it's the closing portion of the book of Genesis, Vayechi. Now you know that in other places, the book of Genesis is called Sefer HaYesharim, the book of the straight ones, because primarily it is the life story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is called the straight ones. So therefore, when Jacob dies, the book of Genesis ends. So it does go on a couple of verses until Joseph dies, because the next book begins the exile. The exile didn't start until obviously Joseph, who was the viceroy, died, and then all his brothers died. But really it talks about the death of Jacob. And what's the last thing Jacob does before he dies? He gives all his children blessings. So let's talk about the blessing of Judah. Okay? That's what we're going to focus on. So he goes ahead and he says as follows. This is how he starts. It's a couple of verses. The opening verse. Yehuda ati yeducha achicha. Judah, as for you, your brothers will acknowledge you. Why does Judah's blessing start with that? Give him some individuality. Not only that, on a mystical level, it definitely is telling us that Judah's blessing depends upon his brothers acknowledging him. Primarily, who is Jacob talking about? The 3 older brothers who we just finished talking to. That means Judah's blessing depends upon the acknowledgement of Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. What does that mean? Why? You don't find any other blessing of any other one of the tribes that depends upon neither their maternal, I mean, they're all paternal brothers, but even their maternal brothers acknowledging them. Why does that have to be? Okay? Now, I want to first share with you something else, which will make this whole class right away make sense to you. In the Talmud Tractate Megillah, it asks a simple question. What is Mordechai called in the book of Esther? Ish Yehudi. Now, normally the word Yehudi was saved for those who were from the tribe of Judah. However, we know that Mordechai was from the tribe of Benjamin. So why do they call Mordechai Yehudi? So I want to actually read to you the exact answer, as it is in the Talmud. Quote, yet he was called a Yehudi because he rejected idolatry. And anyone who rejects idolatry is called a Yehudi. So Yehuda is all about faith. To the point, any person who has this theistic, this one God faith, he is called Yehuda. That's why Mordechai, who's a Benjaminite, was called Yehudi, and that's why every Jew is called Yehudi. So what do we see here? Number one, Yehuda is about having faith in one God, faith in God. Number two, we see that Yehuda depends upon the acknowledgement of his brothers. Now, on a personal, microscopic level, you know that we're taught Olam Katan Zeha Adam, the microscopic universe is the man, which is a reflection. The human is a reflection of the entire universe. And therefore, anything you're going to talk about will always be able to interpret that into the microscopic world. Where do I have that within me? Thus, we have always talking about the Haman within me, the Pharaoh within me, the Moses within me, the fish within me, the bird within me, everything. Just throwing it out there. I said bird. Bird, you should know, in the world of Kabbalah, within the human being, represents thought. Why? Because all other animals, according to law, guardianship, you never have to put a roof. You only have to put walls. For a bird, you have to obviously put a roof. Thus, the same thing, the only challenge with thought is that it can fly away on you. Thus, Kabbalistically speaking, the microscopic world is the concept of a bird too, which is the process of your mind. You know that there's a point in intellectualizing and philosophizing where you've passed the truth, and every moment you continue traveling, you're going further away from truth. Thus, there needs to be a roof upon it too. So everything exists in the microscopic world. So in Chassidus, whenever we talk about any deep mystical levels, we always have to bring it to the microscopic world. Where is my inner Ruvain? Where is my inner Shimon? Where is my inner Levi? Which brings about my inner Yehuda. That's what we need to understand. Okay? Okay. So let's get straight to work. Here's the list of the mystical concepts. And for those of you who are new, present physically or digitally, you know that in the way Chassidus works is we start with a practical question. However, then we go seemingly off topic. Because the way of Chassidus is not to deal with the darkness, but to turn on the light. So we're going to go ahead and start studying things, and you're going to ask yourself, wait 1 second, did he lie to me like all those other rabbis? They give a title to bring you there, and then they don't talk about it. We're going to be talking about practically finding faith. But we are going to go on a little mystical journey to make things clear so that we can understand it from a Hasidic bird's eye point of view. So, here is a list. Concept number 1, faith. Where can I find you? Concept number 2, Reuben, seeing God. Concept number 3, Shimon, hearing God. Concept number 4, Levi, bonding with God. Concept number 5, receiving Judah's blessing. And last concept, number 6, Judah's blessing in exile, Vayechi. Okay? That's what the name of the Torah portion is, Vayechi. So let's get straight to the first topic. The first concept is faith. Where can I find you? So here I will share with you the first mistake that we all make when we're looking for faith is that we're shopping in the wrong store. I clearly want to share that with you. You don't go into a hardware store and ask them for a slice of pizza. Most of us, when it comes to faith, we're doing that. We're going into every single store that does not sell faith, and we're looking for faith. And I include in that Torah lectures. I include in that self-help books. I include in that spiritual retreats. If you go to any of these shopping for faith, you are shopping in the wrong store. Now, in order to understand that, we need to understand what is faith. What is faith? So you're all going to tell me faith is you believe in God, you believe in a one God, you believe God is everything and everything is God, you believe that God controls everything, you believe that there's no such thing as coincidence, everything is God talking to you, and the answer to all of that is Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Everything you're saying is holy. But that's not the definition of faith. I'm going to give you now the ultimate definition of faith. The ultimate definition of faith is that faith is nothing more than our soul's relationship with God, period. I want you to hear that. Faith is not a state of mind. Faith is not a feeling of the heart. Faith is not religiosity, as we spoke about it before. Faith is nothing more than the purest state of relationship between your soul and God. Now, let me share with you what that means. We know that in chapter 2 of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe quotes a verse from Job, and he adds on one word there. Job says that the soul is a chelek elakai, it's a piece of God. And in case you think that Job was being Shakespearean and poetic with us, the Alter Rebbe adds on the word mamash. It is truly, practically, tangibly a piece of God above. Thus, very often we refer to the soul as a spark and God as its mother flame. Thus, you now understand that if the soul is a piece of God, then the relationship from the soul, between the soul and God, is not a relationship between two other people, two other beings. Rather, it's an inner wholesome relationship of one with itself. Thus, I want to share with you, again, not in my notes, but I actually got an atheist to finally bar mitzvah his son many years ago. It all started on a wonderful Federation trip to Israel, Federation mission. I was introduced to an unbelievable person, really, one of the warmest Jews, who he not only he would take his shirt off his back for you, I actually found out from his partner that all of a sudden in their office they started getting huge paintings from Israel, because as you remember, when the Intifada was happening, the Jewish finances in Israel was suffering terribly. So to help them out, he was buying unnecessary, pure, expensive paintings just to help another Jew. That's who he was. But he was an atheist. He believed the Jewish people as a nationality. He was struggling to the point where he didn't bar mitzvah his child. Not a simple thing. Sitting by my table Friday night, I shared with him that an atheist is the ultimate proof of God. I said, how do you figure? I said, because the physics, according to Kabbalah, of an atheist is a piece of God telling God, I don't believe in you. That is the infinite power of God. He ended up on mitzvahing his son. Don't ask me how that worked, but, sometimes you say L'chaim, you ask God to speak through your voice box and get out of the way. But that's what atheism is in a Kabbalistic point of view. God is everything and everything is God. But now let's talk about it more specifically about that which the verse in Job and Alter Rebbe's explanation, chapter 2 of Tanya, says that this is truly a piece of God. Not the process of a light, of a concealment, of a contraction. The soul is truly a piece of God. Thus you understand that if we talk about faith, is nothing more and nothing less than the soul's relationship with God. You realize then what we're talking about. It is part and parcel of a piece of God to have a oneness and a faith and a consciousness of God. Thus I share with you again, if you're shopping anywhere outside of your soul for faith, you're shopping at the wrong store. No. So if faith is the natural existence of a piece of God, then why do so many of us struggle with having tangible faith? And let me just explain to you what tangible faith is. Tangible faith will not be monitored by you. It will be monitored by your doctor who takes your blood pressure. That's very simple. When you have faith in God and you're not stressed and you're not worried, your blood pressure isn't high. So let's not make this a spiritual journey. I'm talking about it physically. Stress is the number one killer today. It's a fact. People of faith just don't experience that level of stress. The worrying, the not sleeping at night, the high blood pressure, the emotional eating, guilty. That's a lack of faith. That's all it is. And thus when we talk about emunah, we're talking about shop in the only one place where it exists. Your faith exists nowhere. Not in no books, not in no Rosh Yeshiva, not in no nowhere. It exists only within the very genetics of your soul. Because if your soul is a piece of God, which it is, then the relationship between a piece of God and God that wholesome inner oneness relationship is the experience of faith. Okay? So, let's go further then. If your neshama, which is within you, it is faith, right? You never looked in the mirror and wondered if I exist. So the soul, basically looking at itself, should already have that notion. Why is it wondering? Of course I have faith. And thus, what we're going to say here is a very interesting teaching. And I spent a lot of time looking up the exact wording of this teaching. And I put it into here, because this wording is very, very challenging. Normally in Hasidus and Kabbalah, you have other wordings. The wording here is Chelik Boida Nase Nivra. A piece of creator becomes creation. Now, that is only said about the Yechida, the core essence of your soul. Everything else is not a piece of creator. A piece of creator becomes creation. Nowhere else will you have that. Because when we say God is everything and everything is God, normally we talk about the process of the infinite light. The infinite light is not a piece of God. It's the light of God. It's the expression, the radiance. The only time where you say the word a piece of creator becomes creation is about not even the whole soul. It says there are 5 levels to the soul. We're talking about the core essence of the soul. Yechida. From the word yachid, oneness. And there's only one oneness. With that being said, what does this saying really tell us for our class? What it tells us is that there's a huge difference when the soul is a piece of creator before it becomes a creation. There's a transformation where the soul is now not called piece of creator, it's called a creation. Thus the soul that vivifies our body, the soul that descends and becomes truly one with my animalistic soul and my body, all that, let's start. For starters, before we even talk about the descent and the concealments and the contractions and why there's 5 different levels of a soul. A piece of God doesn't have levels. It's just pure essence. Thus, the reason why all of this happens is, for starters, a piece of creator became creation. That is the biggest transformation, descent transformation of the soul. Whether it's within or without. Whether it's within the essence of God, or it transformed now to being outside of the essence of God. Okay? Now, it's funny, Bless my son, my 8-year-old. I see a lot of trailers to videos with him. So I was watching one of these trailers, I don't know, some type of these new things, Transformers. So it's not really Transformers, it's called something else, Aliens. He was explaining to me, no, Tati, that's not Transformers, that's whatever. I made a big mistake there. But basically the way it works is that the humans are in some room and they're moving, and because of the way they're moving, the outside, that big embodiment of whatever is fighting with the aliens, I don't know. My point is, that's not what's happening here. It's not that the Chelik Elakai Mimal remains up there, and up there he's making moves, and down here in the physical body we're just moving away. There actually is a descent in which the soul clothes to the point that it so clothes itself within that we're actually taught the actual house of the soul is the higher thinking part of the brain, the neocortex. It actually houses itself there. It becomes one and affected by its new environment. It says even a complete tzaddik, when he comes down here and his soul is within that physical neocortex of his mind, regardless of how much he loves God and he fears God and he has faith in God, that's nothing to compare to what his soul was experiencing before it descended into the body. Thus, I want to share with you that even though faith is nothing more than the most natural oneness of the relationship between a piece of God and God, that's not what we experience in our conscious mind. Thus, faith becomes a hidden subconscious that goes through so many concealments and so many different levels. And thus, we now are going to turn to what the Zohar calls Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is called Raya Mehemna, which is Aramaic for Ro'eh Neman, which means the faithful shepherd. Now, normally when we call him that, the simple meaning is that we're testifying that Moshe Rabbeinu did his job faithfully. However, on a deeper mystical level, it means something else. It's not just a description of his report card, rather it is the description of his job. His job is to be Raya the Mehemna. His job is to shepherd, to pasteurize, to feed his flock with faith. So it's not that it's faithful shepherd, rather he is the shepherd of faithfulness to his flock. Because there's been such a detachment between the natural relationship of the soul, which is now the depths of the subconscious, but not the conscious. Thus, Moshe Rabbeinu has a job to feed, and so does the Moses of every single generation. Whether it be Mordechai in the times of Purim, the Arizal in his times, Baal Shem Tov in his times, until the Rebbe in our times. That is the primary job of a Moses, to feed his flock with faith, to help them internalize and digest and to eat, so that the subconscious, abstract, becomes the practical conscious of how we look at life. And obviously, especially in the times of difficulty, but even not so in the time of difficulty. If faith is the natural existence of your neshama, of the essence of your soul, then it should be that way when you're in the deepest troubles or when you are in the best of situations. Okay? Now the question is, how does Moses feed? How does he feed? Okay? Okay. So let's start with number one. Child number one, Reuben. So we're going to go back, thank God, each matriarch gives a name to every one of their children, which is, by the way, very unusual. Abraham and Isaac, we see that Abraham called his son Isaac, right? But with Jacob, it was always the mothers. Even when it came to Benjamin, first Rachel called him Ben-Oni, the son of my affliction, as she was dying in childbirth, and Jacob said, no, Binyamin. Well, very interesting that the matriarchs were the one that gave the names. Jacob didn't mix into it for whatever reason. However, in this process, we have a reason to why. So let's look in Genesis. What is the reason that Leah called her first son Reuven? Because God has seen my affliction, for now my husband will love me. Right? So you know that Rachel was the loved one. Leah was not the loved one. Rachel was the one that was supposed to be the only wife, till Laban tricked Jacob. Thus Leah was always the second wife, not the loved wife. And therefore, when she has a child, she says, oh, now Rachel doesn't have no kids. I'm the one that brought him a child. He'll love me. So now what does it mean? Reuven comes from the word ra'ah, see. God has seen my affliction. Let's talk about the inner Reuven. What does the inner Reuven mean? So you should know that in Kabbalah we talk about the highest level of intellect. Beyond understanding and perception is that notion of seeing. Seeing is believing. We're going to soon talk about, give you a jump start. Shimon comes from the word Shema, hearing. Two different. So what happens here? We're talking about having a concentration, a contemplation, an understanding of God to the point where it's absolutely one and seeing. So let's go to simple etymology of words. Atheist means he doesn't believe in God. There's no God. What does agnostic mean? Agnostic means simply without knowledge. I'm not sure there's a God. I'm not sure there's not a God. I'm agnostic. I didn't say I don't believe. I just don't know. What is the definition of Reuven? That's the antithesis of an agnostic. Reuven literally sees. He doesn't just understand. He hasn't just learned. He sees. The understanding of God and God's greatness and God's relationship with him is so real that he sees God. Do you know where this primarily happens? We're taught, the Rebbe says in the Maimer, this primarily happens when we talk about divine providence, hashgacha pratis. I saw a cute saying, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. The job of Reuven is to make sure that in our lives there is no coincidences and God never remains anonymous. I've shared with you once before the story, the guy who was saying, God, I'm so late for a meeting, God, please, I need a park, please, I need a park. Oh, forget it, I got one. That's the person whose life is full of coincidences and God will always remain anonymous. That is the antithesis of Reuven. Reuven is to continuously contemplate on divine providence. Don't let these divine providences slip through your hands. When you keep on having a tangible radar for all the divine providence that happens in your life, it's unbelievable how the most amazing career shifts happen by coincidence. This person went to law school and ended up going into a total different field because they had a friend who was in prison and they were online, and all of a sudden they have a whole new business. And thank God, very well. And this person goes ahead and he went somewhere he wasn't even planning, he wasn't even thinking. He meets this other person and voila, he now has a spouse. When you think about these things, don't let them just, fall through your fingers. When you keep on contemplating, concentrating how God is in your life, thus you see God. What does that bring to? That brings to loving God. In the world of prayer, that word refers primarily to the first portion of the Shema. The first portion of the Shema is Shema Yisrael, Shema Kina, Shema Echad. God is our God. God is one. To what level? To what level do I need to really tangibly digest that? To the level of the next verse. V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. Love God, your God. Having a tangible, seeing the hand of God in every step of your life brings you to love God. In the level of the more global, fundamental level of service of God, we're going to refer to a teaching and ethics of our Father. And what does it say there? Upon three pillars that the world stand. What are the three pillars? Torah study, service, which means prayers, and acts of kindness. Reuven is the third pillar. Acts of kindness. Love, acts of kindness. In a more Kabbalistic term, this is where you have the bring down from above to below relationship, which basically means I draw down the grace of God. What does grace mean? Unearned. Thus, how do we do that? When we shower kindness upon those in need, unearned kindness. If I owe it to you, it's not kindness, it's payment. If I'm doing it so that you should help me back next time, that's an investment. That's not an act of kindness. An act of kindness is unearned. Thus, Reuven, love, seeing, divine providence, closeness to God, where God is in every step of my life, is what? Acts of kindness. Drawing from above to below. Okay? Then let's go to the second one. What is Shema? What is Shimon? Shimon is what? Shimon, let's read the verse. Since God has heard that I am hated, he gave me this one too. The word Shimon comes from the word Shema, heard. What does that mean? What does that mean in the level of my inner service, my inner Shimon? What this means in my inner Shimon is that we're talking about hearing. What do we say? There is no comparison between seeing and hearing. Why? By the way, you should know, not on my notes. There's a law in the book of Judges. Ein eid nasadayin. A witness cannot become a judge. Why? When you saw the event, it hit you so hard, you're not open to any interpretation than the one you saw. You can't be a judge. A judge has to be open to all interpretations. So seeing is so real. It's so internalized. Hearing is the contrary. Hearing is distance. Hearing is abstract. Oh, I trust you, my friend. You told me you saw that? I believe you. But then I'll sit down and they'll start asking me, really? I mean, is that possible? So I don't think you're a liar, but now I'm questioning. If I would have seen it, you can ask me all the questions in the world. I can't. I saw it. You're right. I have no answers, but I saw it. I know what happened. The difference between seeing and hearing. Seeing God is what? Seeing God is, I see His hand. I wake up in the morning, I was planning to go there, and all of a sudden I had a flat tire, and because of that, at the mechanic, I met this guy, and all of a sudden now I have a new business deal, and I didn't lose my house. I can go on and on and on. That's seeing God. Hearing God is very different. By the way, just that you should know, in the world of Chabad Hasidus, we refer to hearing very often when we talk about that which is beyond my capacity to digest. When I talk about the omnipotence of God, I talk about the infinitism of God. Oh yeah, I understand it. Yeah, I can write a lecture on it. But I can't really tell you that I digested it. Because can we ever understand what it means past, present, and future coexists? Can we really understand what it means that God always was and always will be? We can't really wrap our heads around that. To us, the definition of a something is that it has a beginning, it has an end, it has a space, it has a place, it has a time, it has a definition, it has a form. So much so that we refer to God as nothingness in the Torah. We say the world was created something out of nothing. What is that supposed to mean? It was created out of God. We refer to God as nothingness because God defies anything that I could label as a something. When you get into that world, at best you're hearing. I want to share with you what that means in service. Distance creates fear, not love. Thus, in the second portion of Shema, what is it all about? V'hayim shemoah, and if you will listen, i.e., hearken to my voice, you'll get the range, you'll get the stuff. But hishamru lachem, beware, lest your heart will lead you astray. That's yira. That's fear. Now when we talk about this on the 3-pillar level, the fundamental service of God, this is the pillar of prayer. This is from below above, refining and elevating the below, the distant, to become closer. That's what prayer is all about. From my heart below, yearning and elevating up to my God above. Okay? So that's what Shimon is all about. Let's talk about the next one. Levi. So let's go back to the verse. What did Leah say about Levi? Why did she give him the name Levi? So let's go back and quote the verse. Now this time my husband will be attached to me. In Hebrew, the verse says, Yilove alai. Yilove, attached. He will be attached. And thus, she called him Levi from the word Yilove. Okay. What does this mean? So going first to the prayer part, after you finish the Shema, you start the blessing after the Shema. What's the first word you say? By us we sing it. Emet v'yatziv v'nochem v'kayim v'yoshav v'ne'emon. Emet, genuine, v'yatziv, and established. And we go on for 15 different words, all of the same concept. And what do we say after that? Hadovar hazeh aleinu. Hadovar hazeh, this statement. Which statement? Our sages say Hadovar hazeh refers to the words of Torah. You will remember that, what did I say last week? I spoke to you about the chapters 4 and 5 of Tanya. That mitzvahs is a one-way hug. God's will hugs me. God's will embraces, encompasses me. But I don't internalize, i.e., I don't hug the will of God. Thus, the hand that gives charity. Did anything change in the hand? No. Torah study is where you have a double hug. I am embraced by God, but I digest, I internalize God. In the verse, we refer to true Torah study as bread within my stomach. What does that mean? What it means is, first and foremost, Torah study means you don't just say the words. Torah study means that my brain has completely digested and understood to its present best capacity the word and the wisdom and the will of God. I now understand what God wants me to do. I understand why He wants me to do it. I understand the details. I understand which verse it was extrapolated from. I understand means I internalized, I digested. Let's go back to new scientific studies. We now know, we've known this for quite a while, that the amount of creases in the brain differs from someone that is using his brain, specifically in coming up with new concepts. The study actually showed that construction workers had a very high amount of creases because they're always on the spot looking for new, okay, what I got to do, this is falling, this and that. Number one. Number two, today we know that every single thought you have fires off huge amount of neuron connections in your brain. We also know from different studies, interesting, I don't know how this works honestly, but they've done studies on the weight of brains. The weight of a brain of Einstein is much heavier than another. Thus we now see that intellect, which kind of defies time, space, and weight, 2 + 2 = 4, or EMC, doesn't have a time, a space, or a weight, yet it does have a physical difference in the brain. Most importantly, the hand's movements doesn't change when you give charity. Your mindset and view of life changes when you study Torah. Thus, the ultimate bonding with God happens when you study Torah. Thus, which pillar of the 3 pillars is Levi? Levi is the pillar of Torah study. By the way, talking about bonding, the Zohar in volume 3 says, Araisa, the Torah, brings about that Yisrael v'kutchebrichu, that the Jew and the Holy One, blessed be He, kul echad, all is one. The ultimate bonding. Doesn't say that about any mitzvah. It says that about Torah study, because of what I just shared with you from chapter 4 and 5 in Tanya. So thus we now know that what? That Levi is emes v'yatziv hadovar hazeh, Torah study. It's the pillar of Torah study. It's the bonding with God. Now, let's start wrapping up the class. So what do we have? We have Yehuda ata yeducha achicha. Yehuda comes about through what? Through achicha, the previous 3 brothers. How do we bring about faith? We're soon going to talk about what Judah is. We already said Yehudi, the one that has faith in one God. That's what Judah means. We now know that it comes about with a prerequisite. Number 1, Reuven. You have to see God, i.e., divine providence in God, which means to give birth to love of God, which is what the first portion of the Shema is all about. Okay? A closeness. Then you have to have Shimon. What is Shimon all about? Hearing God. Concentrating, contemplating on that which is quite elusive to us. The omnipotence, the distance. What does that bring about? An awe, a fear. Guard you, beware lest your heart take you astray. That's the second portion of the Shema. Okay? That we said is prayer. Then we need also, why Reuben we said was act of kindness. And then we have Levi. What is Levi about? Levi is about Torah study. Emes b'yatziv. My Torah, I got to digest it. I'm not studying poetry abstract. I'm studying my God, my existence. One. Digesting to fully understand. Rashi says in the Shema, Vishinantam levanecha. It doesn't say v'lemadatem. It says Vishinantam, and you shall teach. Why? So it says it should be so sharp within you. The definition of true Torah study is that I wake you up in the middle of your sleep and you're half groggy. That's the Talmudic definition. I ask you a question, you can answer me. Why can you answer me? Because it's not something I got to remember what I read. It's right here. It's right here. You ever saw someone when he's half groggy forget his name? When I'm awake, I forget my kids' names, but that's unfortunate. I mix up their names all the time. But my name I never mixed up. That's what Torah study is all about. Torah study is you wake me up and you ask me, what hand do you put your tefillin on? Left. Are you a lefty? Right. Chadudim. That's what it means, bonding with God. It's one with you. It's not I have to think about. Now, that brings about Judah. So now let's go into Judah. Concerning the name of Judah, what did Leah say? She says, Hapam, this time I will thank God. In our service to God, we shared this a little bit last week, not a little bit just. We spoke about gratitude demands what? Gratitude demands humility. The person who's not humble will never be grateful because their sense of entitlement is always bigger than anything they've ever received. And thus you're always owing. There's nothing to be thankful for. Right? We spoke about that last week. You win the $249 million lottery, and you're already complaining. The government took half, the rabbi wants his percentage, and what's left for me? You're working on what? Let's say, exaggerate, $100,000 salary. You just made what? A half minus another. You made 30% of $249 million. I should be grateful. That's what happens. So let's go back to what we're talking about here. Number one is absolute humility. Let's see what that talks about. In prayer, where is that? The Shmona Esra. Give me another name for Shmona Esra. Amida. What does Amida mean? Standing. Amida also means silence. Standing in silence. Stop. This is the prayer where you're standing before God in absolute silence. In the sense where the person next to you is not allowed to hear what you're praying. It's interesting. It says a person who prays loud. Listen to the words here. Very interesting. I didn't even think about it until I'm sitting here with you now. It says Mekatni Amuna, has small faith. It's interesting how everything fits together. To go ahead and stand before God in the four worlds. Amida is the world of Atzilut, absolute divinity. Thus, the prayer service of Amida is absolute transparency and humility. Now the question is, how many pillars did it say in Ethics of Our Fathers? There are 3. We already gave 1 to Reuven, acts of kindness. 1 to Shimon, prayer. 1 to Levi, Torah study. No, what's the fundamental service of Yehuda? So to understand this, it's an unbelievable twist of the Rebbe. He takes us to a different teaching in Ethics of Our Father. In chapter 4 in Ethics of Our Father, what does it say? There are 3 crowns. The crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, the crown of kingship, and above them all, Ma'al Gabehem, the crown of the third, or the crown of the good name. Keser Shem Tov. We got a little problem here. The Mishnah starts off by telling us a fact. There are 3 crowns. He ends up somehow with 4 crowns. So he should have said, there's 4 crowns. The first 3 crowns are Torah, priesthood, and kingship. And above them all is the crown of good name. The deeper mystical interpretation of that is that what makes a good name an elevated, exalted crown is only when you first have the first 3 crowns. What makes a good name is having the priesthood, the kingship, and the Torah study. And then it goes on Chassidus to explain in the inner microscopic world, what does priesthood mean? That's service, bringing sacrifices, right? What is kingship? That talks about. But the point here is that what makes Judah a fundamental service to God, when there's only 3 fundamental services to God, the 3 pillars, it only becomes through the first 3 pillars, is al gabehem, upon them. This becomes the most fundamental. Just like upon the first 3 crowns, you now have that a good name is an exalted royal crown. What does that mean? In our lecture, let's explain it simply. In our lecture, what did we just say? We started off by saying from the Talmud of Megillah, what is Yehudi? Faith. One God, no idolatry. Idolatry also includes ego. It doesn't just mean figurines. I believe in one God. And then what do you have over there? Besides Yehudi, we said that every single soul, which is a piece of God, its natural state of relationship with God, is the only true definition of faith. And we said that everyone has that. However, what did we explain? Because of the transformation where a piece of creator becomes creation, and because of the descent and concealments and contractions, until Nebuch we take this soul and we stick him into a physical body that has a whole different set of needs than it's ever understood, it's now hidden. It's in the subconscious. Now we understand why this pillar isn't a pillar until you have the first 3 pillars. Because faith, when it's hidden in your subconscious, is not a fundamental service of God. When you have a person say, I believe. But then you find that the person is far from believing. He's not lying. Remember I once shared with you, what does the Talmud say about the Jewish thief? He prays to God not to get caught. If you believe in God, why are you stealing? If you don't believe in God, why are you praying to Him? Because the Jewish thief has faith. But the faith is abstract. Of course I believe in God. A little joke mood. So this kid ended up going, for whatever reason, he was kicked out of all the Jewish schools. His father had no choice. The kid was a bandito. So he sends the kid to a Christian school. He has no choice. The kid comes home, he tells his father, what's going on here? A trinity. A mother Mary and a father and the ghost and the son. His father right away sits him down and says, listen son, we are Jewish. We only have one God and we don't believe in Him. That was his mindset. And for a Jew, that makes sense. Just like the thief who's stealing. Thus faith in God, to the point where the thief is praying not to get caught, is not a fundamental pillar of service to God. Thus, until you have the first 3 pillars, what's the job of the first 3 pillars, my friend? The job of the first 3 pillars is to make a connection between the ultimate subconscious, which is the oneness relationship of the core essence of your soul with God. That is your ultimate subconscious. And then to take that and connect it to your conscious. Don't tell me I believe in God, but I don't sleep at night because the mortgage is due. One of the two. One of the two. Of course, don't lay in bed all month and then wait for God to deposit, wire you the rent money. But if you are working, you're doing what you can do. If you have faith in God, you shouldn't be suffering from insomnia. It can't be. Can't be. Anxiety and faith don't coexist. Stress and faith don't coexist. They just don't. Yeah, of course it's hard work. Just because I believe in God doesn't mean God's, put me into the first class on the cruise ship. But it does mean that I know it's going to be okay. That's all it means. No, I don't know how much I'm going to work, what kind of journey he's going to take me through. I don't know how, what, when. But one thing I could tell you, I have faith in God. And what faith do I have in God? Let's be very precise. That He's unconditionally loving and compassionate to me. Not that there is a God. Not that God is is unconditionally loving and compassionate. That's not faith. That's not what the essence of my soul has to say. The essence of my soul has to say that she is a piece of God. A piece of this loving, unconditional loving and compassionate God. Thus we now understand why Moses has to work so hard. Every Jew, the Talmud says, the whole story of Passover and Shabbat, and they didn't know what to do. They asked Rabbi Gamliel, and he didn't know. And he said, leave them alone. Ma'minim b'nei ma'minim. They are believers, the sons of believers. And thus they'll know what to do. And sure enough, the next day they saw what the Jews did, how they hung the knife for the sacrifice of Pesach and the horn. Ra'a ma'asev v'niskar alocha. They saw what the believers, not the scholars, they saw what the believers did. You're right, this is what we have to do. To a halachic point, he said, leave them alone. They're believers, the sons of believers. Now, if we are believers, the sons of believers, then why does Moses have a job? What do you have to feed the believer with belief, with faith? Now we understand. The job of Moses is twofold. Number one, he has to get us face to face with the essence of our soul. He has to connect our ultimate subconscious with our practical, tangible conscious. Step number one, but we're not done yet. Step number two, he has to connect the essence of my soul with the way it was in its source. Not as it is a creation, but as it is a piece of Creator. That's what Moses has to do. And how does Moses do that? Through Reuven, Shimon, Levi. Through teachings about these three concepts, through being a living example, through using his own love, fear, and faith in God to feed those who follow him, his flock. That's the job of Moses. That's why we need to be able to have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Then we can have Yehuda atiducha chicha. I want to just take one more point and then we'll close it up. I want to go to the second half of that verse. Because the second half of the verse is very interesting. What is the second half of the verse? First we said, Yehuda atiducha chicha. Judah, you will be acknowledged by your brothers. And then it goes on to say, your hand will be at the nape of your enemies. Right? That's the second half of that verse. That's the first verse of the blessing of Judah. From the word enemies, what do I know? I know that Mashiach's not here yet. When Mashiach's here, there won't be no enemies. So I know this verse is talking about when we're still in exile. But what does it say when we're in exile? That your hand will be at that nape. That means that what? That means that when we have still in exile, it's not pshat, we have to wait, only when Mashiach comes will we stop suffering. That is not the Chassidish approach. The approach is that as long as we have faith, then even in exile, we will be victorious over our enemies. Which enemies, Gidon? Our inner enemies, doubt, fear, anxiety, lack of self-respect, lack of feeling loved and protected. Our outer enemies, financial, health. Then we have on top of that, the nation's enemies. I don't need to explain that too much. I'm sure you all witnessed what happened with that vote in the UN. Upon all of this we're told, Yehuda, faith will give you victory, and your hand will be on the nape of your enemies. And thus, let's wrap it up. Now we understand that this is the entire topic of Vayechi. What does Vayechi start? That Yaakov lived 17 years in Egypt. the last 17 years of his life. For those of you who like playing around with numerology, the word Tov equals 17. Good. Rashi says that, he quotes our sages, Jacob lived his best years in Egypt. How in the world? How did Jacob, the holy, righteous tzaddik, live his best years in exile, in the land of idolatry and corruption? He lived in Israel. He lived with his dad Isaac in Israel. That wasn't his best years? No, it wasn't. Why? Because if you look last week, it says that before he moved down, the minute Joseph revealed himself and said, Daddy, come on down, I'll take care of you, the first thing he did, V'Yehuda shalach lefanov lahoidis es Goshen. He first sent Judah down there. Judah, we're going into exile. First and foremost, I need you to clear the ground. Bring us faith in the difficult times. When you have Yehuda with you in exile, exile can be your best days. In closing, let's go to the very, very end of this. In closing, first and foremost, stop wishing that you can have faith, because you already have faith. How do you wish to have that which you already have? What is needed is to reveal the faith that we each already have within us. For this, wishing does not accomplish anything. I wish I had $1 million. All right, no, buy a lottery and a dream and a wish. By the way, I never checked my lottery tickets for a long time. Why shouldn't I have the wish for a little longer than a week? I paid $1. But what is wishing? Wishing is for something you don't have. That which you do have, wishing doesn't help. You don't need to wish. You need to get to work. What work do we need to do? Let's go over it. There's a 3-step process. Reuven, seeing the divine presence in our lives, acts of kindness. Shimon, hearing the omnipotence and infinitism of God and prayer. Levi, bonding with God and Torah study. This will reveal our essence, core faith to our conscious mind and heart. And this will bring us victory over our internal and external enemies. And thus goodness will prevail. Shekoyach.